40 tons of rotting vegetables. That's what corporate efficiency smells like in November. The local cannery called them deformed. Abigail called them salvation. While they were busy burying thousands of pounds of perfectly good carrots in a dirt trench, she built a booming horse ranch on their trash. The frost on the windshield was thick enough to require a credit card and 5 minutes of numbing labor. Abigail didn't have 5 minutes, and her credit card was currently maxed out on winter hay. Winter in this part of the valley didn't arrive with a gentle dusting of snow. It arrived like a collection agent, cold, unrelenting, and demanding everything you had left. For Abigail, that meant waking up at 4 in the morning to the sound of 22 horses kicking their stalls, hungry for alfalfa that currently cost more per ton than the truck she used to haul it. Boarding horses is a fool's errand. You take on the liability of million-dollar animals owned by people who complain about a speck of mud on their horse's blanket, all for a margin so thin you can see right through it to your inevitable bankruptcy. She was running out of feed. She was running out of money. She was running out of time. That Tuesday, Abigail drove past the Valley Canning Facility, the massive corrugated steel buildings dominating the skyline on the edge of town. White steam billowed from the roof vents, smelling faintly of boiled peas and industrial cleaner. She wasn't there for a tour. She was there because she'd heard a rumor from the local feed store. She parked her battered Ford by the loading docks and walked toward the back lots. That's when she saw it. It looked like a small mountain, a jagged, bright orange peak rising from the frozen, tire-rutted mud. As she got closer, the sheer scale of the waste became apparent. Carrots, tens of thousands of them. Some were the size of her forearm. Some were split down the middle, resembling a pair of tangled legs. Others were perfectly normal, save for a slight bend or a knobby protrusion. They were culls, reject pile. Abigail stood there, the bitter wind whipping through her thin canvas jacket, staring at an absolute fortune in livestock feed sitting in the dirt. "Hey, you can't park there!" She turned. A man in a high-visibility jacket and a hard hat was stomping toward her. He looked overworked, under-caffeinated, and deeply annoyed by her presence. His name tag read, Greg, Operations. "I'm not parked," Abigail said, gesturing to the truck idling 50 yards away. "I'm just looking at the pile." Greg stopped, crossing his arms. He let out a long, visible breath into the frigid air. "Nothing to look at. It's trash. Haulers are coming tomorrow to scrape it into the landfill." She looked back at the mountain. "There's nothing wrong with them. They're just crooked. Machines can't peel crooked," Greg said flatly. His voice carried the deadened tone of a man who had explained company policy 1,000 times. If it doesn't fit the mechanized peeler, it jams the line. If it jams the line, we lose 20 grand an hour. So, the optical sorter kicks them out. Boom. 40 tons of reject. 40 tons, Abigail repeated, the number echoing in her head. 80,000 pounds. Yep, and it costs us $200 a truckload in tipping fees at the county dump just to get rid of them. Greg rubbed his temples. "It's a headache, a massive orange headache. Now, I need you to leave before safety compliance sees you." She didn't move. She looked at the frost clinging to the orange roots. Nature's refrigerator. The temperature wasn't going above freezing for the next 3 months. They wouldn't rot. They would just sit there, perfectly preserved in the winter cold. Abigail calculated the rough math in her head. A horse can safely eat 10 to 20 pounds of carrots a day, mixed with a reduced hay ration. 22 horses. That's maybe 400 pounds a day. 40 tons would last her the entire winter. It would cut her hay bill in half. It would keep the bank off her back. "Greg," she said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline spiking in her chest. What if I make your headache go away? He squinted at her. What are you talking about? I have a ranch, 2 miles down the county line road. If you let me take them, you don't pay the tipping fees at the landfill. You don't pay the dump trucks. I'll clear the lot. Greg laughed, a harsh, barking sound. Lady, you're going to put 40 tons of carrots in the back of an F-250. You'll be here until the next presidential election. I have neighbors. I have tractors. I can get dump trailers. Abigail stepped closer, locking eyes with him. You want to save your budget? Let me take the trash. He stared at her for a long time. The wind howled, rattling the loose corrugated siding of the cannery. He looked at the pile, then back at her truck, then down at his clipboard. You have 48 hours, Greg said, his voice dropping a register. If this lot isn't scraped to the mud by Thursday morning, I'm calling the haulers, and I'm charging you for the delay. Deal. Getting permission was the easy part. Moving 80,000 pounds of dense, wet root vegetables was a logistical nightmare that Abigail was entirely unprepared for. She didn't own a dump trailer. She owned a standard 2-horse bumper pull and a flatbed that had seen better days in the late 90s. She drove straight from the cannery to the farm of Arthur Jenkins, a retired dairy farmer who lived entirely on black coffee, spite, and Social Security. Arthur listened to her pitch while leaning against a rusted John Deere. When she finished, he spit a stream of chewing tobacco into the dirt. You're out of your mind, Abigail, he said. You know how heavy carrots are? They're mostly water. You're talking about moving water. It's going to break your axles. Arthur, if I don't get cheap feed this week, I'm selling the herd. I'll have to close the boarding barn. I need your hydraulic dump trailer. I'll give you $1,000 for a 3-day rental, payable in spring when the boarders pay their quarterly. He scowled at her. He knew she was good for it, but he also knew the sheer physical toll of what she was proposing. You'll need my skid steer, too. You ain't shoveling that by hand unless you want a broken back. By 3 o'clock that afternoon, Arthur and Abigail were back at the cannery lot. The skid steer roared to life, a small yellow beast against the towering orange mountain. The first bite of the bucket into the pile sounded like 1,000 snapping bones. The carrots were crisp, dense, and unyielding. Arthur maneuvered the machine, dumping the first load into the hydraulic trailer. The heavy, wet thud shook the chassis of her Ford. The smell was overwhelming. It wasn't rot, it was an intense, earthy sweetness, the smell of damp soil and raw sugar. They hauled the first load back to the ranch just as the sun began to set, casting long, bruised, purple shadows across the snow-dusted pastures. Abigail had prepped an empty hay barn, laying down massive plastic tarps over the dirt floor. When she hit the hydraulic lift on the trailer, the metal groaned. A tidal wave of orange cascaded into the barn, rolling and tumbling across the floor. It took them 2 days, 48 hours of non-stop, bone-rattling labor. They drove back and forth until the truck's transmission whined in protest. Abigail's hands were stained a sickly, jaundiced yellow-orange. Her lower back screamed every time she pressed the clutch. The cold seeped through her boots, turning her toes into blocks of wood. They worked under the harsh glare of halogen floodlights, scraping the cannery lot down to the bare, frozen mud, just as the Thursday morning whistle blew. Greg from operations stood on the loading dock, drinking coffee from a styrofoam cup. He gave her a single, stiff nod as she hauled the last load away. They had done it, but moving them was only half the battle. Now, Abigail had to convince 22 spoiled, high-strung horses and their even more high-strung owners that they were pivoting to a root vegetable diet. The first feeding was tense. She started by roughly chopping the carrots with a machete in a heavy plastic trough. A violent, repetitive motion, that splashed orange juice onto her jeans. She mixed a heavy scoop of the jagged chunks into the evening grain ration, cutting back the expensive alfalfa by a third. She walked down the main aisle of the barn. 22 heads hung over the stall doors, ears pricked forward, nostrils flaring at the unfamiliar scent. Abigail dumped the first bucket into the feed tub of a massive Hanoverian gelding named Duke. Duke belonged to Brenda, a woman who treated her horse less like an animal and more like a fragile Fabergé egg that might shatter if exposed to a stiff breeze. Duke lowered his massive head. He sniffed the tub. He snorted, blowing a few pieces of grain away. He looked at Abigail with deep, liquid brown eyes, utterly offended. "Just eat it, you oversized lawn ornament," she thought. He nudged a crooked, two-legged carrot with his velvet muzzle. He picked it up gingerly between his teeth. Crunch. The sound echoed sharply in the quiet barn. He chewed, his jaw working slowly at first, then faster. A line of orange foam appeared at the corner of his mouth. He swallowed, dropped his head back into the tub, and began to devour the pile. Within 10 minutes, the entire barn sounded like a massive wood chipper. Crunch, snap, crunch. The rhythmic sound of jaws working through the dense, sweet pulp. They loved it. The sugar content, the moisture, the sheer novelty of it. They cleared their tubs and licked the plastic clean. Abigail stood in the center aisle, leaning heavily on the pitchfork, and let out a breath she felt like she'd been holding for 6 months. She was going to survive the winter, but survival wasn't the end of the story. 2 weeks later, the owners started to notice. Brenda cornered her by the tack room on a Saturday morning. She was wearing a coat that cost more than Abigail's truck's new transmission. "Abigail, what exactly are you feeding Duke?" she demanded, crossing her arms. Abigail's stomach dropped. She hadn't explicitly told the boarders about the carrots. She had just altered the feed chart, which was technically within her rights as the barn manager. But boarders are notoriously territorial about their animals' diets. "I've adjusted the forage ratio," Abigail said carefully, "supplementing with fresh root vegetables. It's high in beta-carotene and vitamin A. Why? Is he acting up?" "No," Brenda said, her brow furrowing in confusion. "He's glowing," Abigail blinked. "Glowing?" "His coat. I haven't even clipped him yet, and his winter coat is shedding out like silk. The dapples on his hindquarters are completely visible. And he has so much energy, but he's not spooky. He's just vibrant. Whatever supplement you're using, put it on my tab." Abigail didn't have the heart, or the stupidity, to tell her the supplement was trash from the Cannery's coal pile. She just nodded. "It's a proprietary blend. I'll make sure he keeps getting it." It wasn't just Duke. By late December, every horse in the barn looked like a show ring champion. Their coats were slick and shiny despite the freezing temperatures. Their hooves were growing out strong and hard. The high moisture content of the carrots kept their digestive tracts moving, entirely eliminating the winter colic scares that usually plagued the barn. They were thriving on the rejects. The math on Abigail's ledger shifted from glaring red to a steady, quiet black. Because the carrots were free and the hay usage was slashed, she was actually turning a profit during the worst months of the year. She paid Arthur for his trailer rental 2 months early. She bought a new set of tires for the flatbed. She slept through the night without waking up in a cold sweat about foreclosure. Word began to spread. The equine world is small, and horse people love nothing more than talking about their animals. At local winter shows and clinics, people noticed the horses from the ranch. They saw the shine. They saw the muscle tone. They asked questions. Her boarders, eager to boast, told everyone about the exclusive natural dietary program at the facility. By January, Abigail's phone started ringing. The phone rang at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday. Abigail was wrapping her right elbow in a tight compression bandage. Chopping 400 pounds of dense root vegetables by hand every day for 3 months had given her a brutal case of tendinitis. She answered on the 4th ring, pinning the receiver to her ear while she secured the Velcro. Abigail? Harrison Miller. Anyone in the tri-state equine circuit knew the name. Harrison owned a massive logistics firm in the city. He funded his daughter's equestrian career with casual, frictionless wealth. His horses lived in facilities that resembled high-end country clubs. "What can I do for you, Harrison? I was at the Winter Classic in Springfield this past weekend." His voice was smooth, accustomed to immediate compliance. "I saw Diane's jumpers. I saw Brenda's gelding. They looked unbelievable. Diane mentioned you've put them on a new nutritional program. Some sort of European root extract protocol?" Abigail stared at the dried mud caked on her work boots. European root extract protocol. Boarders possess an exceptional talent for inventing narratives to justify their success. "It's a whole food forage adjustment," she said cautiously. "I want to move 3 of my Dutch warm bloods to your facility. Next week. What's your monthly board?" "I don't have 3 open stalls, Harrison. We're at capacity." A brief silence hung on the line. Men like Harrison weren't used to hearing the word no. "I'll pay double your current rate, plus a premium for the nutritional program." Abigail's pulse jumped. Double board on 3 horses would pay for a new tractor by July. It would pay off the mortgage on the lower pasture. But physics dictates farming, not finance. You cannot put 25 horses into 22 boxes. "I appreciate the offer, Harrison. Truly. But I don't have the space. I can put you on the wait list." "Put me at the top," he said, a sharp edge returning to his tone. "Call me when a stall opens." He hung up. Abigail set the receiver down and rubbed her aching elbow. By late February, her wait list was 14 names deep. It was a bizarre, intoxicating feeling. For 5 years, she had scraped by, ignoring a leaky roof over the indoor arena just to afford enough hay to keep the herd from dropping weight. Now, millionaires clamored to hand her checks because her horses had shiny coats and solid hooves. The irony tasted like copper. She was selling the illusion of elite care built entirely on a mountain of corporate garbage. But illusions are fragile. Hers shattered in March. Spring in the valley is ugly. The pristine snow turns into a treacherous, sucking grey slurry. The ground thaws during the day and freezes at night. The carrots were finally beginning to soften. The massive pile in the back barn settled, releasing an intense, almost fermented smell of sweet earth. Abigail had purchased a used gas-powered wood chipper from Arthur Jenkins, cleaned it, swapped the blades, and repurposed it as an industrial shredder. It saved her elbow, but it was deafening, and it required dragging the carrots out of the barn in a heavy wheelbarrow. It was a Tuesday afternoon. Abigail was out back, running the chipper, blasting orange pulp into heavy rubber tubs. The roar of the 2-stroke engine drowned out everything else. She didn't hear the footsteps behind her. She cut the engine to switch tubs. In the sudden, ringing silence, a voice snapped like a dry twig. "What in God's name is that?" Abigail spun around. Brenda stood 10 feet away, wearing pristine rubber riding boots and a horrified expression. She was looking past her, directly at the tarp-covered mountain of crooked, muddy carrots. "It's forage, Brenda," Abigail said, wiping a fleck of orange pulp from her cheek. She marched past Abigail, yanked back the plastic tarp, and a small avalanche of ugly roots tumbled out onto the dirt. Some were bent at severe angles. Some were fused together like gnarled fingers. None of them looked like the manicured produce sold at an upscale grocery store. Brenda whipped around, Her face flushed red with betrayal. "Are you feeding my horse trash?" "Abigail, these are culls. This looks like industrial waste. You told me Duke was on a proprietary blend. I told you I adjusted his forage ratio and supplemented with root vegetables," Abigail countered, keeping her voice dead level. "You never match a panicked boarder's energy." "Which is exactly what I did. You're feeding my $80,000 animal garbage from a dump." "I'm feeding him beta-carotene, digestible fiber, and high-quality water content," Abigail said, pointing toward the main barn. "How does Duke look, Brenda?" "That's not the point. How does he look?" she demanded, stepping toward her. "He shed out his winter coat a month early. He hasn't colicked once this season. He won the Tri-State Hunter Derby 2 weeks ago, and the judge specifically commented on his top line. Did he do that on garbage, or did he do that on the feed I put in front of him?" Brenda opened her mouth, then closed it. The pristine illusion of the equine industry was colliding head-on with the gritty reality of agriculture. She didn't know how to process it. "You pay for results, Brenda. You don't pay for packaging," Abigail said quietly. "A horse doesn't care if a carrot is straight. He doesn't care if it comes in a shiny bucket with a gold foil label. That pile right there is the reason our board hasn't gone up while hay prices tripled. It's the reason Duke is thriving." She stared at the mud, wrapping her arms tightly around herself. "If you want to leave," Abigail told her, the cynicism settling cold in her chest, "you can pack your trailer today. I have Harrison Miller on speed dial. He'll take Duke's stall by 4 o'clock this afternoon, and he'll pay double what you're paying me." It was a massive, arrogant gamble. But Abigail knew their currency. Exclusivity was worth more than comfort. Brenda looked up, her eyes narrowing into sharp slits. "Harrison Miller called you?" 3 weeks ago." She let out a long, ragged breath. She walked over, picked up a heavily bent carrot, wiped a smear of dirt off it with her thumb, and tossed it back onto the pile. "Make sure Duke gets a double portion after his jump schooling tomorrow," she said tightly. She turned on her heel and marched back toward the main barn. The secret was out, and to Abigail's utter shock, it didn't matter. In fact, it only fed the myth. When Brenda inevitably told the rest of the barn, the narrative simply shifted. They weren't feeding trash. They were feeding a raw, holistic, unrefined agricultural diet. The waiting list grew to 20. By late August, the valley baked under a relentless, dry heat. The mud of spring was a distant memory, replaced by a fine, choking dust that coated everything. Abigail spent the summer capitalizing on the wait list. She took a heavy loan against the increased value of the business, poured concrete, and built a state-of-the-art 10-stall barn on the upper ridge. It filled the day the roof went on. Harrison Miller took 3 of those stalls, but as the days shortened and the nights grew crisp, the looming shadow of winter returned. Abigail had 32 horses now. 32 massive, fast metabolisms. Hay prices hadn't dropped. The summer drought had driven them 20% higher. She needed feed, real volume. In mid-October, Abigail drove her truck, now sporting a new transmission and a fresh coat of wax, back to Valley Canning. She didn't park by the loading docks this time. She parked in the visitor lot. She walked through the glass double doors into the carpeted lobby. The air conditioning hummed. It smelled like stale coffee, floor wax, and corporate anxiety. She asked the receptionist for Greg in operations. 10 minutes later, Greg appeared. He looked exactly the same. Overworked, under-caffeinated, wearing the same faded high-visibility jacket. He stopped when he saw her. He looked out the glass doors at her truck, then back at her, his eyes narrowing. "You're the carrot lady." "Abigail," she corrected. "Do you have a few minutes? We need to talk to your plant manager." Greg frowned, crossing his arms. "David? He's busy. If you want the cull pile again, it's starting to build up. Just take what you want. You know the drill. I don't want to just take what I want, Greg. I want to solve your operational bottleneck permanently. Go get David. 20 minutes later, Abigail sat in a windowless conference room. David, the plant manager, looked like a man who lived entirely within the cells of an Excel spreadsheet. He wore a crisp blue button-down and a tie knotted just a fraction too tight. Greg sat next to him, looking deeply uncomfortable. Greg tells me you hauled away 40 tons of our rejected produce last year, David said. He tapped a plastic pen against a legal pad. We appreciate the favor. Saved us a minor headache. I saved you $8,000 in landfill tipping fees and hauling costs, Abigail said flatly. Don't pretend it was a minor headache. Your optical sorters reject roughly 10% of your intake every fall. You run 20 hours a day during harvest. That pile gets out of control fast. And the county dump charges you a premium because the water content of the carrots wrecks their compactors. David stopped tapping the pen. He looked at her with a new, sharp assessment. You've done your homework. I run a business, David, just like you. She leaned forward, resting her elbows on the cheap laminate table. This year, my operation is larger. I can take 80 tons, but I'm not doing it as a favor, and I'm not doing it in a 3-day scramble. What are you proposing? She slid a single sheet of paper across the table. It was a contract she had paid a local attorney $300 to draft. A 5-year exclusive hauling contract. You don't call the dump trucks. You don't pay the landfill. I will stage my own rolling dump trailers at the end of your sorting line. When a trailer fills, I haul it away. You don't touch it. Your lot stays clean. Safety compliance stays off your back. David read over the paper. His eyes tracked down to the bottom line. He scoffed, a dry, dismissive sound. You want us to pay you? He asked, incredulous. You want us to pay you to take away feed that you're using for your own livestock. I want you to pay me $100 a truckload, Abigail said smoothly, which is exactly half of what you currently pay the commercial haulers. You instantly slash your waste disposal budget by 50%. I handle the logistics. I take the liability. You get a clean ledger. You're using our waste to feed your animals, David argued, his corporate ego bristling. He didn't like being outmaneuvered by a woman in denim and work boots. We should be charging you for the product. Abigail laughed, a genuine hard laugh that echoed off the whiteboard. It's not a product, David. It's trash. It's legally classified as agricultural waste. If I walk out of this room, you are going to pick up the phone tomorrow and pay a trucking company $200 a load to bury it in a hole in the ground. You have zero leverage here. I am offering you a 50% discount on your own inefficiency. The room went dead silent. Greg stared at the table, suppressing a smirk. He hated the budget meetings as much as she did. David looked at the contract. He looked at the math. He was a numbers man, and the numbers didn't care about his ego. He picked up his pen, clicked it once, signed his name. That winter, the operation ran like a machine. Arthur Jenkins' dump trailers parked neatly at the Cannery's loading dock. Every time they filled up with crooked, twisted rejects, Abigail's hired hand drove them back to the ranch and dumped them into a newly constructed, temperature-controlled concrete bunker. The cannery paid her every 2 weeks. She used their money to buy her reduced alfalfa ration. The horses ate like kings on a subsidized dime. On a freezing morning in late January, Abigail leaned against the heavy wooden gate of the main pasture. The breath of 32 horses plumed in the frigid air. Their coats gleamed like polished mahogany in the pale sun. Harrison Miller walked up next to her, holding a steaming thermos. He watched his expensive warm bloods trot across the frozen dirt, their muscles rolling smoothly. You run a hell of a program here, Abigail, he said softly. I've never seen my horses look this good. Whatever magic is in that European protocol of yours, It's worth every penny." She looked out at the herd. She thought about the mountain of ugly roots sitting in her bunker. She thought about the corporate machines that deemed them worthless, and the wealthy men who paid her a fortune to feed them to their prize animals. "It's not magic, Harrison," she said, pulling her collar up against the wind. "It's just knowing what to do with the things other people throw away. Sometimes the best opportunities aren't wrapped in a bow. They're buried under 40 tons of frost and mud. Thank you for listening to this story of grit, survival, and seeing the value in what others throw away. If Abigail's hustle resonated with you, hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs a reminder to keep fighting, and subscribe to the channel for more stories of rural resilience. Drop a comment below. What's your crooked carrot?